start at the beginning and find out a little bit about where you were born. I guess it was pretty close to here in Winfield.
Right. We were born in Ark City, which is a town south of here. And that was a long time ago, 1925, actually.
1925.
Yeah.
And from there, where did you grow up?
In Ark City, and then I went to junior college there. And I have two brothers. Another one is also my kid brother, which is 18 months younger than I am. Was an orthodontist for the Arabian American Oil Company and trained their dental staff over in Arabia. Mm-hmm. And then my younger brother, which is about 9 years younger than I am, is the world's greatest authority on Robert and Elizabeth Browning. Mm-hmm. And he has an office at the British Museum. And he has an office here in Winfield. And he produces the documentary, or actually the documents of Browning's in the 50s to wherever. And
did that start off as a hobby for him?
No, he when he was in the third grade, he read the poem. Was it The Ring in the Book or whatever? One of the Browning poems, and he was totally taken by it. And so when he got into the fourth grade, the teacher in our rural school in Arkansas City, there were three daughters that were teachers. One had first, second, third, and fourth grade, and the other had fifth and sixth, and the other had seventh and eighth grade. And so they, so when he went to the fourth or fifth grade to another teacher, that teacher just flew all apart, and she went next door to the classroom for her sister and just cussed her out royally. She said, "This kid hasn't learned a thing, and you haven't taught him a single solitary thing." But he really knew the Browning material, and he was totally fascinated by it. And from that, he's never deviated. We went to Baylor University
together.
Well, I was graduate basically by the time he went.
Okay.
But and Baylor University has one of the major collections of Browning material, mm-hmm. and he's added to it tremendously. And even this last summer, there was a castle in France that during the Browning's era in the 1800s, the literary critic of that day was in France, and all the people would send their manuscripts and first edition copies of their books signed and everything to this critic. And my brother uncovered all that, and he got several hundred first edition books from Carlyle and Browning and everybody else in that era. Mm-hmm. And he's made quite a dent in the literary world. And he
lives here in Winfield as well?
When he's not in London. He actually has received personally by himself more grants than any college or university from the government because of his tremendous understanding, and the way he writes the grants is unbelievable. They send out these applications to various professors around the world, and all the reports come back says, give him anything he wants. There's nobody on the earth can do as much for that price that you can possibly get. And he just keeps on getting grants and grants and grants, which is quite remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me one second. I'm just going to make sure this mic is working. It is. Good.
Okay, good.
So it's you and two brothers.
Yes.
You and two brothers.
Yeah.
And your other brother, who is an orthodontist as well, did he go to Baylor as well?
He graduated from Southwestern here.
Okay.
And also from Baylor. And I think he has 2 degrees from here, 2 or 3 from Baylor. And he also went to dental school in Kansas City, Missouri. And
how many years between the two of you?
Yeah. 8 months, I think.
Okay.
They were orthodontist between me and my second brother.
So you had a pretty normal childhood growing up. I mean,
I had total hard. That's a problem. I have some civilization today that is stupid. Diabolical government the teachers or the family, mother and father discipline the children, and they just grow up wild and ignorant and everything else. That's the downfall of our civilization, actually.
But that's not the case in your family.
My mother raised her voice, threatened to snatch me bald-headed if I didn't do exactly what she said. And, so it was, and even the teachers in Kansas City, they just had a paddle hanging on the wall, and they used it every day on somebody. And
Well, I grew up with that same
era.
Yeah, it wasn't too long ago.
But it wasn't as long goes by. But anyhow, that's and so all three of us evidently got our doctorate degrees, and eventually I earned 6 degrees, but I was so had such a run-in with the trustees at Baylor University that I only picked up 3 or 4 of them. I forget.
What does the MS stand for after your name?
Master of Science in organic chemistry and education and things like that.
In growing up, and this is my father, and you were about the same age,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, the food that the family used to put on the table back in the, say, the 30s or the 40s, what have you noticed in terms of the way we feed our families?
Well, first of all, we grew it ourselves in those days. And second of all, we didn't have any engineered or genetically altered foods, which are quite devastating to the civilization, to the health, actually. And it's unfortunate. We grew our own garden every year, and we had to work like a Turk to survive, which was a blessing. And I think that probably in our civilization now that God in all of his infinite wisdom will take us to the woodshed and give us a real licking, I guess, or beating. And if we have total poverty here soon, why, we might make something out of the next generation, but I don't know. It's kind of doubtful.
Well, let's see. It would have been what year were you diagnosed with cancer?
I think it was in 63.
63. So that would have put you at about
I don't know,
35 years of age.
35 or 6, something in that area.
Yeah.
I remember right.
Yeah.
Actually, what I did was I kept passing out, and the third time I woke up in the hospital, I was laying there in the hospital bed, and my wife was over in the corner crying, and my 2 best friends were, one was a board-certified internist and cardiologist, and the other one was a surgeon, a board-certified surgeon. And I said, well, what's going on, boys? And they said, well, he said, we got good news for you and bad news. And I said, well, lay it on me. And they stepped a little closer to my bed, the hospital bed, and said, well, good news is that it's not your heart that's giving you any trouble. And I said, what's the bad news? They said, you got terminal pancreatic cancer. And so I said, oh, that's okay. I said, just cut it out and throw it away, and I'll go on. And I was producing evidently too much insulin and causing the blackouts, because of going into insulin shock, evidently, because the tumor mass was in the pancreas. And then and the surgeon stepped up to the bed a little closer, and he said, I wouldn't have you on the table, you'd die on the table. And he said, I'm not going to have that on my reputation. And then I said, well, what am I going to do? And they looked at each other and stepped a little closer to the bed and said, get our kids' teeth straightened quick. And
these are your 2 friends.
Right. And I had 2 children from each of these physicians as orthodontic patients. And they, the nearest orthodontist, I was in West Texas, the nearest orthodontist was 300 miles away. And they just said, we don't want to drive every 2 weeks to 300 miles to have an orthodontic adjustment for our children. So get them straightened as quick as you can. And from that point on, I never took another orthodontic patient because they told my wife I had 2 months, and they told me at the bedside there that I might have 6 months.
Yeah.
And so that's where it all started. And then
How had your diet been, though, up to that point? Did your
Well,
diet
I was
change
like a
from...
Ubangi that was jumping and hopping around at a white missionary boiling. I would eat every cow steak that came by, and that was I just overindulged in meat. You know,
Was that, growing up, though, was that a part of the family diet, a lot
well, it
of
was a
meat?
little. You know, we didn't have enough money to have that much, but since I was an orthodontist, well, we could afford, and we had a lot of steak and. But of course, we didn't even have the junk food we have now. But I don't know how the civilization survives now.
Well, at the time that you were diagnosed with cancer, then you had already earned your Master's of Science in
And two
biochem
doctorates, and
and
yeah,
2 doctorates. So you had a fair idea of nutrition, and
right. But
this was
you
sort of a
don't
wake-up.
practice what you preach.
Practice what you preached. And
Right.
like you say, I guess this was a pretty big wake-up call.
It was. God slapped me upside the head with a 2x4 and got my attention real quick.
Well, where do you go from there when somebody tells you you got 6 months to live?
Well, that was quite a shock, of course, to anybody. And then you just you get down and pray a little bit, and God just said, basically told me what to do. Actually, when I was 5.5 years old, I was out in the sand pile in our backyard playing, and Christ appeared to me and said, "You're going to be a medical missionary." And I did. At 5.5, I didn't know what a medical missionary was. And so I ran screaming into the house and asked my mother what a medical missionary was. But he didn't tell me where I was going to be. He did not realize. I didn't realize. I thought I wanted to go to Africa. The Belgian Congo was actually where I wanted to go, and that's why I went to Baylor to. Part of my degrees are in religion and education and everything else. But I ended up here to the most pagan nation on earth, which is Americans. So here we are, we're slaughtering our children and babies, and we're killing each other with all kinds of wicked, wild things.
Well, what happened? I mean, after when you're diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which even to this day is terminal, and I guess
It's always terminal. The only people that's ever survived pancreatic cancer are the ones on my program. I had a 100% cure rate on those people that did what I told them to.
Yeah.
And there's no one has ever survived pancreatic cancer in any other form of treatment except mine.
Yeah, I guess on the records from conventional medicine, if they diagnose it early enough,
They can
and they
survive
make it
2 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But so, what did you do? What was the first after
Well, we
being
got
given that news? What do you do?
well. We changed our diet immediately, and we stopped getting eating the meat, and because it was in the pancreas, then I went to the health food store and got as much pancreatin as they could order for me, and I was going to at least digest what food I was eating. And then we got some goats, and we got a goat, and the first goat was to make goat's milk, which was a good food, and goat's milk yogurt. And we kept the goat out in our fenced-in swimming pool, and so we had goat's milk. And one day the dog catcher came by and says, "We can't have a goat in town." And I said, "Well, there's no law against it." He said, "Well, then you're a dog catcher anyhow." And I said, "Don't bother me." And so then the city council sent an invitation to come to their next meeting, and so they said, "We'd like for you to take your goat out of town and put it out to the edge of town." And I said, "Oh, why don't you ask me in the first place?" And I said, "Well, you're lucky." I said, we had, at that time, we had 3 adopted children. And I said, "The children need milk, and you're fortunate, because I planned to get a gorilla for having milk for their children, but yeah, I can't get any import license for that." And so they died laughing. And then we moved the goat out to the edge of town. I found a farm there that would.
Where were you living at the time?
In Midland, Texas.
Midland, Texas.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't allow a goat, even though there's probably 1 million head of cattle.
Well, they
Within
wouldn't in town. This was in town in
Oh, I see.
a fancy part of town.
So when did you, what happened that would lead you to feel better? I mean, how did you know you were making progress or making it worse?
Well, whenever your malignant tumor masses are being digested, you feel worse. So taking the pancreatin and changing the diet in about 2 or 3 weeks, I felt a whole lot worse. I felt I was dying, and then I had to stop for 4 or 5 days taking the enzymes while my body cleaned out the poisons. And that's one of the keys to surviving the treatment, and it's also the key to know that it's working, because you feel a lot worse. And when you stop for 4 or 5 days taking the enzymes, then your body can dump out the toxins and poisons. Then you feel again, and you have to start over and go through it again. And at one point, you get to the point where you are afraid you're going to die, and then a little later you're afraid you're not going to die because you're so sick, and that's the problem. But at last, my recovery took about 18 months. After that, I developed a program. It just takes about 6 or 8 months to really resolve the biggest problem, and then from then on, once you have a damaged pancreas, where the pancreas fails, you'll have to take some form of enzyme the rest of your life. I still take 2 or 3 enzyme tablets with each meal.
Mm-hmm. But back then in '63, would you have anticipated the goopy, sick feeling that you were going to get from taking this pancreatin?
No.
So you didn't know if you were doing yourself better or worse?
No, you think you're going to kill yourself, but
Yeah.
when you stop, you begin to feel better and afraid you think you might make it, and then then you decided, well, I decided I will take some more, and it was the cyclic process because you have to destroy the malignant tumor mass because the surgeon wouldn't cut it out, so
Yeah.
I had to do that. And then it takes a while, from 6 to 9 months, routinely, in the thousands of people I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
It takes 6 to 8, 9 months to get rid of the worst part of the tumor mass.
Does the body go through a catabolic and then an anabolic cycle within a 24-hour period?
Yes, I determine metabolism. All metabolism is controlled, not part of it, not some of it, not almost all of it, but all metabolism is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Mm-hmm. And the autonomic nervous system is a sympathetic dominant side and a parasympathetic dominant side. And you go through 2 cycles every day where your sympathetic or your energy cycle is, and then about 2:30 or 3 in the evening or afternoon, you have a parasympathetic cycle where your liver and pancreas produce, and you're kind of exhausted, and also and during that time the body repairs and heals, and then you have another cycle of energy, and then about 3:30 in the morning is the next parasympathetic cycle, or the loss of energy cycle. Mm-hmm. And where the repair and rebuilding take place.
Right.
So it's been quite an interesting thing, and to accept this repair and rebuilding cycle, because everybody wants to go all the time in our society.
Have energy all the time.
Right, but it doesn't work that way. And probably the Mexicans or the Spanish people have their siestas are based basically on the parasympathetic cycle, or the parasympathetic metabolism cycle.
Yeah. So in America, we drink a cup of coffee at 2 o'clock in the afternoon instead of taking a nap.
Right. Instead of goofing off and repairing and rebuilding, you just keep pushing.
So the cycle actually happens twice a day then, the rebuilding cycle and then the
2:30 in the afternoon and 3:30 in the morning. Is basically what it does.
I'm sure that makes a lot of sense to people who tend to be a little tired around that time in the afternoon.
Right. So you're repairing and rebuilding your body at that time.
At the point that you had been diagnosed with cancer, there were several other very eminent scientists who had done research. Had you gone back and had looked at some of the work of say, Linus Pauling or?
Well, yes, Linus Pauling, actually, when his wife got cancer, why, he thought that all his vitamin C would cure, and it doesn't. It misses the whole scientific paradigm of cancer.
Yeah.
And I told him what to do, but he wouldn't do it, and it killed her, of course. And then he killed himself with his vitamin C. The vitamin C is, the intravenous vitamin C is pretty dangerous or damaging to the body. And it's a synthetic vitamin, and it doesn't work. Neither does anything else, except our paradigm accounts for all the successes and all the failures of all therapies, whether it's radiation, X-ray, surgery, vitamin C, or anything else. Whenever you have a malignant condition, these therapies work in relation to the fact that they take the load off of the pancreas, or they take, whether it's a large tumor mass they surgically remove, or they do chemotherapy. Then it takes the less pancreatin to clean up the body and to heal the body. And so that, and we do recommend surgery and chemotherapy and sometimes radiation if the tumor masses are causing a crisis, like a paralyzation, like a cancer in the spine or something. Doing radiation will temporarily keep it from spreading, and it will temporarily relieve it. But it's not the solution. It isn't the scientific paradigm that's required to cure cancer.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that I've read was that the enzymes, which are, of course, the component part of breaking down the proteins, are regenerated or made from the amino acids, which are the component parts of the protein. So
Right.
it's a chain. It's a loop that has to be fulfilled.
You have to have protein, and we, in our during our active crisis therapy part of our program, we recommend a couple eggs a day for protein, and nuts and seeds, and some grains. But you have to have some protein to make your enzymes. So.
Is it